I did a show on Freedom Free for All that looked at the cult aspects, or the apparently occult aspects, of what is going on with the transgender debate. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this subject into 2 different shows, and I'll explore this more thoroughly next week. But there are sort of occult symbolic themes that run through the whole transgender thing that gives you the impression that there are elite manipulators playing little mind games with people. So the problem becomes at this point, how do you sort of differentiate the difference between the two? And it's tough. Maybe next week I'll play another quote from Carl Jung, who sort of got into these difficulties. But what I want to do is I want to bring this back around to the question of whether or not there is a higher power, and whether or not that higher power speaks to us in the course of our lives. Again, I gave that example of the greeting card with my now ex-wife, and the sort of meaningful coincidence that seemed beyond the odds. When I saw what was going on with the transgender debate 3+ years ago now, I felt like it was outrageous and that I needed to get involved in some way. And initially, I envisioned my involvement as being as a researcher and a scholar, and I would just research subjects and I would write essays. So out of that came my Synanon essay, and I was not, when I published my Synanon essay, which now probably has close to 100,000 views, when I published that, I was not a public figure. I wasn't doing interviews. I wasn't doing public speaking. I wasn't doing activism. And I didn't think that I wanted to get involved in that. But my sort of the success of my Synanon essay brought a lot of tension on me, okay, because so many people were reading it and they were talking about this. And this sort of put me out there in the transgender debate. Primarily globally, not so much in Canada actually at first, but primarily globally. I became sort of this well-known person for having written this essay. And my presence on the landscape drew the attention of Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson, who is in late 2017, I guess, began to become interested in this subject. And she entered this subject and was trying to make sense of it in, apply it to her sort of activities and stuff. And what she discovered was that there was this figure out there in the transgender debate who was local and was, in her opinion, kind of interesting, and that was me. So she began sort of trying to contact me. So she contacted me and she was trying to get me to do an interview with her. And initially I had I didn't even want to do interviews, right? I didn't even want to do it because I didn't think that I had any sort of charisma, and I didn't think I had any sort of marketability, and that putting my face out there was not going to be a good thing for what I was trying to do. Plus, I had sort of powerful social phobias in terms of groups and stuff like that. And I was very sort of self-conscious, so I didn't want to do that. But she sort of badgered me and badgered me and badgered me until I agreed to do an interview with her. It was actually my second public appearance, but my first public appearance was very sort of brief and fleeting. I went to the Chilliwack School Board and spoke on behalf of Barry Neufeld, who was under assault at that time. But I didn't really, it was a nerve-wracking experience for me. Again, I had social phobias and I was trembling through the whole thing. And I just, okay, that's done. I don't want to keep on doing this. But Laura Lynn convinced me to do this interview. It was 3+ years ago. I was a little slimmer. I was a little younger.
In my ongoing effort to counter this madness and promote parental rights, I recently interviewed one of the most vocal opponents of the transgender agenda, a person that is himself a transgender identified male, Jenn Smith. The interview that you are about to see is part 1 of a 3-part interview I did recently with Jenn. with the intention of it being aired on my national television broadcast on Vision TV. Unfortunately, as an example of how crazy this whole gender war is becoming, Vision TV officially banned me from televising this interview, arguing that Jenn's views as a transgender person were actually offensive to the transgender community. The censorship in this case was done by a multi-faith television broadcaster that specializes in catering to religious programming, including Christian shows such as my own. So without further delay, I give you part one of my three-part interview with Jenn Smith. I hope you enjoy our discussion. I only wish we had been able to televise it nationally.
Young people are the most susceptible to this type of programming. I would call it programming too.
Welcome to Laurelyn and Friends. As many of you know, I've been investing much of my time recently in the fight against the sex activist promoted SOGI 123 curriculum in British Columbia schools. Along this journey, I have met some incredible voices in this debate, and one of the most fascinating is Jenn Smith, who is a trans-identified male and has recently become a significant voice in this debate. Jenn has been speaking out for quite some time now on not only what is happening in our schools, but also on what he believes to be a much larger agenda that could threaten freedom itself. Now that might seem like a sensational claim, but as you will learn, Jenn has good reasons for his conclusions. Jenn has degrees in history and political science and has spent years studying propaganda and social engineering strategies. And he claims that what we are seeing right now in what he calls the trans agenda is essentially a massive social engineering project.
Okay, so that was my somewhat reluctant, and you can see I've nervously got my hand or fist on my hip there, feeling kind of awkward because I didn't really want to do the interview. But like I say, she sort of badgered me and badgered me and badgered me until I finally agreed to do the interview. And at that time, and that interview was actually conducted in 2017, and it was supposed to be aired on Vision TV nationally. But of course, as she mentioned there, it was censored and it was never allowed to air on Vision TV. But Laurelyn put it onto her YouTube channel in January of 2018, but it was actually filmed in 2017. And at that time, I had already published my Synanon essay, which maintained that what we were seeing, Mark Hughes, I did an interview with Mark Hughes, who's sort of a well-known comedian, YouTuber out there. He interviewed me, and when I talked to him, he had said that his impression of the transgender agenda was that it felt to him, speaking sort of very intuitively, he said it felt to him like it was the tip of the spear of something much larger. And I agreed with him. And again, my thesis in the Synanon thing was that it appeared that there were forces in our society that were trying to not only divide society, but to create chaos and confusion and to bring about events that would slide us towards a complete reordering of society in a more totalitarian way. Okay, so that was my thesis. Again, I didn't want to be a public figure at that time. I just thought it would be a bad thing and that I had zero charisma, even though when I was in university, I knew that I did very well in university in terms of debating. I was a very good debater. I also, when I did presentations, everybody always found me very, very, very convincing. People, for some reason, listened to me. But I didn't sort of carry that with me outside of university. I still had this sort of phobia that I was lacked any sort of charisma, and that people would just, would dismiss me based on my appearance alone. And no doubt some people did. But I didn't think I'd be able to get a message across, so I didn't want to do it. But I finally agreed to do this interview with Laurelyn. Now, after the interview, Laurelyn began arranging speaking tour of Vancouver Island that was going to be going through all the churches or various churches on Vancouver Island, talking about the transgender agenda and why Christians needed to wake up and this type of thing. And she connected with Chris McKay, who I've since sort of linked up with, and the two of them were talking about doing this speaking tour. And both Chris, of course, and Laura Lynn knew about me, and they sort of got it in their head that they wanted to make me part of this speaking tour, that I should come out and start speaking to the public. I didn't want to. Okay, I didn't want to. Again, I still had those social phobias, and I just did not want to do it. But once again, Laura Lynn kept sort of badgering me and hounding me and saying that I should do it and that I had an important message. And now we're getting back into the voice of God again here, and people can decode this any way they want. I finally said, okay, I tell you what, okay, I don't really want to do this. I don't know that I've got sort of the charisma to pull this off, because to be a public speaker, you have to have a certain degree of charisma in order to be effective, right? So I said, okay, I don't know that I'm going to be able to do this, but I tell you what, okay, go ahead and organize a speaking engagement for me on Vancouver Island. I'll go, I'll see, how it goes, and make my mind up in terms of where I want to go from there, if I want to go from there. And I said, but it's very important. At that time I was working and didn't have any sort of time off available, where I would, be able to take time off without losing money. So I said, I can't do it on a weekday. So you need to make sure it is a weekend. Okay. Just make it on a weekend. Set it up, tell me when it is, and I'll maybe I'll agree to that. Again, I was very sort of trepidatious about doing it. So after a little bit, Chris McKay contacted me again, and he said, okay, Jen, I've arranged your very first speaking engagement in Campbell River. And I said, oh, okay, all right. Yahoo. I wasn't thrilled, but I was telling myself that I had to kind of force myself to do it, just because I felt that my message was an important one, and that nobody else is really bringing out some of the things that I was bringing to the table. So I said, okay, all right, so we'll give it a go then. When is this first speaking event? When did you schedule it for? And he said, okay, well, it's scheduled for I think it was the Black Creek Church in Campbell River, and it's for next Wednesday night. Okay, when he said that to me, I was like, okay, hold it a second. I gave one very simple request. I requested that you make it on a weekend, okay, that it be specifically on a weekend, so I wouldn't have to lose any money in order to do this, and it would be more convenient for me. And you come back to me and say that it's going to be on Wednesday? Like, how could you forget such an important detail? And at that point, I was like, okay, so it seems like, they can't even get like these basic things straight. And to me, this is almost like, I thought, it's almost like a sign that I shouldn't even bother. It's like a bad omen or something. So back to omens. It used to be that, and I talked about this last week when Stephen Crowder went out to sort of harass that black guy. Just before he went out to harass the black guy, there was like a mini traffic mishap right where he was starting his filming.
But we're actually on location in Deep Ellum, Quarterback Garrett?
Yes, sir.
Deep Ellum, Dallas. Listen, we're doing something a little bit different. Wanted to show you what it's like.
There you go.
Listen. Hashtag not all white people, okay? Those were just bad drivers. Don't indict the entire race based on guys in a Chevy.
In the old days, they would have called that an omen. Anytime you set out on an endeavor and something bad happens, that was considered a negative omen telling you not to do it. So a drunk who's thinking about drinking again and thinking about going to the liquor store, and he goes out to go to the liquor store and he gets a flat tire, right? This would be considered an omen. It's the universe telling you not to do it. And so because I am superstitious, that this was some sort of cosmic sign, and it's just a bad sign, like even beyond sort of cosmic signs, it was just like a bad sign that they can't get the most basic details. But then I glanced over at my calendar, okay, and I noticed the date that the Wednesday was, and it was March 14th. And that sort of captured my attention and sent a chill down my spine. And I'll tell you why. So just before I entered this transgender debate, my biological mother had become very ill, very seriously ill, and had a very long, sort of painful death where she wasted away in agony. It was just very ugly to behold, and it really sort of tested my existential patience to its limits, sort of watching her waste away. Now, after this very long illness, she finally died on March 14th. Okay, she died on March 14th, largely out of it, had been largely out of it for a week. It's not something that she planned, but she died on March 14th. Okay, so that's like, okay, so there's a connection there. Chris had no idea about when my mother died, but it gets even more than that, because at the time that my mother died on March 14th, I had to go through her paperwork. And in her paperwork were some papers from my father, who was murdered in Vancouver in, I think it was 1984 or something. I never got to know him at all. And there was this paperwork from my father and his some of his ID, and including his birth certificate. Now, I had never known at that point what my father, and I didn't have any interest. I didn't know or have an interest in what my father's birthday was. Now, in going through the paperwork there, I saw his birth certificate. It said that his birth date was March 14th. So my mother died on my father's birthday after a very long illness, right? And to me, this was like a sort of a cosmic wink from the universe, bringing together the father I never knew with my biological mother. My mother dying on March 14th, my father born on March 14th. It was like a cosmic circle of completion. Now, let me just bring back up my image window and take it even further. But the thing is to keep in mind here is that, so I already had that March 14th, birthday of my father, death day of my mother. And then Chris, through some bizarre chain of events, completely forgets that I wanted it to be on a weekend, and he schedules it for a weekday. And that weekday just happens to be March 14th. To me, this was what Carl Jung calls a synchronicity. It is a meaningful coincidence. And when it happens like threes in that, traditionally in history, it said, this is very important, right? So I took that as a cue that this was something that I had to do, right? And that sort of made me determined. So it was very difficult to me to get into public speaking. If there are recordings of my first public talks on Vancouver Island, you can see at some points in the beginning of the talk, I'm literally trembling and stuff, right? Trying to force myself to do this. It's kind of an emotional issue for me, but it was that event, it was that alignment of 3 March 14th that convinced me it was something I had to do. It was a cosmically ordained thing. That is synchronicity to me. That is the voice of God. And this is what I talk about when I talk about developing a relationship with the divine. And a lot of that is simply about awareness. So increasing your awareness of the world. Because God, to me, is not like this thundering figure that comes out of burning bush and hands you stone tablets. That's not God to me. To me, God is like a wind blowing through a field of grass. God is the ghost in the machine. So as the poet Rumi once said, the worker is hidden in the workshop. Okay, so God is very subtle and speaks in these subtle ways with symbols and synchronicities. And this is why the mystery traditions all down through the ages put such emphasis on symbolism, because symbolism is the language of the universe. It is the only way that the divine can communicate to us subtly. And this translates into dreams. For now, the main thing to note is that that was a cosmic coincidence that convinced me that I had to do this. And this was the divine speaking to me. And this was something I was ordered to do, if you will. So I did it. But there's all kinds of interesting things about that. So let's just bring up my image engine again. So 314, March 14th. What is March 14th? Well, March 14th is an interesting day. So let's go back to Gematria. Okay. Again, Gematria has never really been my thing. Numerology has never been my thing, but numerology is sort of a big thing to what I would call the powers that be. They're all about their numbers. So if you look at the 314 number in Gematria, you'll note here that the numerical or the word equivalents and stuff coincides with the central idea of marriage. So actually, let me just go to... So when I first saw that my mother had died on my father's birthday, I viewed it as kind of a yin and yang thing. It was a blending or a coming together of the life of my father and the death of my mother. So I compared it to the yin and yang, right? And it's like almost a complete match there, because my father, born March 14th, and that's the yang side of the yin and yang. And yang stands for male, light, birth, and father, March 14th. He was born. It's important that he's born on March 14th. Okay. The death of my mother died on March 14th. Well, that's in the yin side of the yin and yang. And yin stands for mother, female, death. So everything's sort of perfectly aligned. And in a kind of a yin and yang, perfect cosmic circle kind of a way. This is actually from a book that talks about symbolism and the yin and yang. It represents the circle of individual destiny. Insofar as the yang and the yin are already differentiated while being united, it is the symbol of the primordial androgen, since its elements are the masculine and the feminine. Okay. So what is that? Okay. So it's the blending of the male and female energies. Okay. So the completion, it's a cycle of completion as well, a cycle of marriage, mother and father, right? But it's also the symbol of the androgen. And what am I? I am, and I have made myself a symbol of the androgen. Okay, so there was a period in my sort of spiritual development and my experimenting with transgender identity that I envisioned myself, rightly or wrongly, and I don't care if people agree with this or not, that's not the point. The point is that I had it in my head that my goal should be to make myself a perfect balance between male and female energies. In that sense, I wanted to make myself a kind of perfect blend between strength and compassion, between intelligence and intuition. Okay, so I kind of made myself internally at a spiritual level, or tried to make myself internally at a spiritual level, the cosmic androgen. Okay, and that's what the yin and yang is. So let's just keep going here. Back to Gematria. Okay, 314, March 14, third month, 14th day, 314. Okay, what significance is that? Okay, so it coincides with the central idea of marriage again, and the connection between the book, Biblios, equal 314, and the Bible and the number pi. So 314 is the symbol of the perfect cosmic circle, and the pi portion of, calculating any sort of circular geometry or spherical, you're always using pi. So there's that 314 connection. Let me just sort of explain a little more of that to you right here. So March 14th is also International Pi Day.
Happy Pie Day. So what is pie? Well, pie is a baked dish of fruit or meat and vegetables. It has pastry top and a pastry bottom. Well, that's not the pie we're celebrating. We're actually celebrating pi. That's the relationship between the middle, or the diameter of a circle, and its circumference, the distance around the outside. And the beautiful thing about pi is it's usually stated as 3.14. That's why we celebrate Pi Day on March 14th, or 3/14. And pi is pretty simple, and we can actually use pi to show you how it works. You take the distance down the middle of the pie, or the diameter, multiply by 3.14, or pi, and you get the measurement around the perimeter of the pie, and that's how you come up with its circumference. Now, one of the cooler things about pi is it's an infinite number. We usually stop at 3.14, but pi is a number that goes on forever. Forever.
So the yin and the yang and the circle are symbols of eternity and the soul. And the sphere is also a symbol of the soul and eternity, all of which is very significant when we're talking about what is essentially a spiritual alignment, at least for me. Okay, so there's another thing. So it's important to be 314 because it symbolizes the circle, and the yin and yang is the circle, and it's the cosmic blending of the mother and the father, and also the symbol of the androgen, the divine androgen, and this all sort of links into me. And I sort of, when I put all of this stuff together in my head, along with the 3 coinciding dates, to me, that was the voice of the universe telling me I needed to get involved, and the rest is sort of history. I became sort of this controversial figure that eventually got the attention of the nation when UBC was kicked out of the Pride Parade. And that wouldn't have happened had I not been had I not been an aware, awakened, superstitious person.